comic books, there are really two types of really big archetypal villains. There is what's called the opposite and what's called the dark mirror. General Zod is the dark mirror of Superman. He's a Kryptonian who just believes in the survival of Krypton and Earth. If it has to be sacrificed for that, so be it. And if you look at Lex Luthor, he is the opposite in every way to Superman. He's human, he's ego-driven, he has no powers. Luthor wants power and accumulates power, and Superman doesn't try and accumulate power, but he has power. And so you just see these two characters become adversaries, and it's a great, iconic hero-villain relationship.
It was important to me that Lex be in the movie because it felt like Lex is really the big Superman villain, and you want him to exist outside of time and be like as big as Superman in a way.
I was not really familiar with their great conflict, Superman and Lex Luthor's, but I read through the comic books and you see there's this kind of funny, consistent theme, which is that, you know, Lex Luthor is trying to destroy Superman, this kind of dark, enigmatic, ultimately evil person, wants to kill this bright, sunny, open character who's good, and I guess that's what makes it an interesting mythology.
Lex Luthor is known for being the primary antagonist of Superman and the smartest human being in the DC universe. He's usually bald, wealthy, wears a business suit and purple-green jumpsuits, and carries kryptonite-inspired weapons. So why do I think that Jesse Eisenberg's Lex was actually a good portrayal? As a villain, I think he held the advantage over Superman and Batman a lot throughout BVS, both respectively, and was also a subversion of what we kind of know Lex as in a more interesting kind of way. Because Man of Steel and BVS are both kind of commentaries of Superman in the modern world after things like 9/11, the media, and politics being more and more prevalent in our lives. When Lex was reinvented for post-crisis or pre-New 52, he was supposed to be that guy who came from like money, he could sleep with any woman he ever wanted, and can get away with murder if he wanted to. And was like a take on Donald Trump at the time, stated by John Burns, before, you know, Donald Trump joined politics and stuff, and he was just associated with being that billionaire entrepreneur and stuff back in like the 80s and stuff like that. But this take on Lex is like a take on Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos than an evil capitalist, because there have been other takes on Lex before where he is just an evil scientist and stuff and not like a capitalist or a billionaire and stuff with a vendetta against Superman for his hair loss and stuff like that. This version in question is motivated to prove that Superman is a false god, that if he is all-powerful, he cannot be all good, and if he is all good, he cannot be all-powerful, which is why he wanted to demonize Superman so badly and uplift his self-image, like blaming Fury with the military operation in Africa, ruining Bruce Wayne's employee Keith Wallace's livelihood to fester his hatred for Superman. Because keep this in mind, Keith Wallace, that guy, he lost his he lost the use of his legs during the Black Zero event from Man of Steel. He basically, his wife and his daughter had walked out on him. He lives in poverty, and the only thing he really has is to blame Superman for his downfall and stuff like that, you know? And the money that Bruce Wayne was sending him and stuff for his, like, you know, for his well-being, like welfare checks and stuff like that, or disability checks, Lex was intercepting them and sending it right back to Bruce Wayne, and he didn't just figure it out until like 2 years later, which is crazy. So anyways, and then of course the courthouse bombing and stuff too, where he blamed Superman as like a co-conspirator in that whole mess. So yeah, and also made Keith Wallace look like a mad suicide bomber at that too. And even though he could have smuggled kryptonite too across the border illegally if he really wanted to, Senator Fitch to kind of on his side to approve, to kind of elevate his self-image a lot more. That's why he was trying to go a little bit more public and stuff. Of course we know Lex can easily do things under the table and stuff if he wanted to, but he wanted to get this out in the open because he wanted that glory. He wanted the whole, like, he wanted to be proven right and stuff like that, you know? He wanted to, again, he wants to demonize Superman and stuff. So that's the reason why he wanted to be a lot more open about kryptonite and stuff like that. But anyways, the only roadblocks really to his plan was mostly Lois Lane for figuring out the prototypes that KGB was using was actually from LexCorp, and how she was investigating that. And then, of course, the turn of events of Batman and Superman both working together, which he didn't really see coming. Then he kind of came up with Plan B, which was Doomsday, believing that Doomsday would obey him. Born from his blood, his task was to kill Superman. And guess what? It succeeded in killing Superman just like he wanted. Born from my blood, and all that stuff. Ancient Kryptonian deformity obeys only me. Remember? Well, although that line of dialogue was cut, and then I gave the bad a fighting chance, but he was too weak. So if man won't kill God, the devil will do it. And at that point, pretty much Lois had already exposed Lex. He was already found at the crime scene and stuff. His reputation was already destroyed. But did it really matter? Like, was it really was it really a blow to Lex? Because I mean, yeah, he still escaped Arkham. He got his wealth back, and he was developing his own injustice gang. And in some ways, he kind of indirectly saved the world by warning Batman of the impending invasion and stuff about Darkseid and Steppenwolf and stuff, pretty much. And then, of course, he was keeping files on different metahumans and stuff who would eventually become the Justice League. Aquaman, Flash, and, of course, Wonder Woman, and Cyborg, And he has the most knowledge on thousands of worlds and stuff that he had learned in under a day from that Kryptonian ship, which, again, 2 years, and nobody's really gotten that much from the Kryptonian ship like that. Not even Stylus Stone, none of them. And, by the way, this was kind of a year one Lex, too, at that. Not like an older, seasoned version who's automatically Lex Luthor from the get-go, That's why a lot of guys try to compare, like, Allstar Lex to, like, oh, this version of Lex or whatever, or so, you know what I mean? Because, like, that's a more Lex in his prime and stuff, This is a Lex that has done all those things that I just said, and still isn't even in his prime yet, He's not even bald yet until by the end of the movie and all that stuff, And then, Justice League, he's still just, he's just started. Or he was until WB canceled it. And after a little rehabilitation from Arkham, he kind of started acting more in line with his, like, the one we kind of know him to be in that Justice League cameo. And it's a little bit hypocritical to say that he wasn't accurate to the character when so many of Batman's villains aren't really that close to, accurate always, and yet they get praised a lot. For example, Joker. Joker's a very popular example. I think the most accurate versions of Joker is Cesar Romero and Jack Nicholson, okay? Even though I'm not saying that there aren't no good versions of Joker after them and stuff, I'm just saying, yeah, a lot of their stories, apart from, Joker being Bruce Wayne's parents' killer and all that, a lot of that stuff is pretty much goes hand in hand. But anyways, Joker has a lot of retellings that we accepted from Gotham to the 2019 movie to Dark Knight, which, by the way, the 2019 movie made $1 billion. Wasn't accurate at all to Joker's character. Dark Knight, Heath Ledger, very good Joker. Not exactly Joker's motivation to throw society into chaos, but that's a story for another day. Or Batman 89 and stuff. Ra's al Ghul, even though I think he was a good villain, he and Bane are both technically race swap versions of the characters and stuff, where Ra's is supposed to be Middle Eastern, Bane is supposed to be from South America. So, they're kind of turned white and stuff like that. And technically, they also lost their fantastical origins and stuff too. No mention of Lazarus pits or anything like that. No mention of Venom and stuff. Bane's source of power. We know that he was getting stronger somehow, whatever. But yeah, or he has some level of like superhuman strength. But they didn't mention Venom at all. Lazarus pits, where Ra's al Ghul has used that to boost his longevity and his lifespan for like hundreds of years. This version of Ra's al Ghul, we don't know how old he is, but it's just more so of a fairy tale that he's sort of immortal, but we know he's just a regular human. But yeah, even the best Catwoman, Michelle Pfeiffer, she doesn't have black hair like Selena Kyle, and her origins kind of changed around a bit. Then yeah, but even then, like Batman the Animated Series, they took inspiration from that version when they adapted her and stuff, because Batman the Animated Series was supposed to be a spinoff of the Tim Burton Batman, but still. But what I'm saying is, even though it's a different take on Lex, there's still validity about that version you might miss at first glance, and that version of Lex was based on Superman Birthright, the actual comic book storyline by Mark Waid, who, by the way, Mark Waid had wrote Kingdom Come when he rambled a lot, he wanted to turn the public eye against Superman and stuff like that. Basically, he had orchestrated, basically his own kind of Kryptonian invasion and stuff to make it look like Superman was the bad guy and stuff like that. Kind of a little bit similar to the plot in Batman vs. Superman, where Lex was doing nothing but to demonize and ruin Superman's reputation and stuff. And it was working too. Hell, he was even whittling away at his confidence too, just like in the comics. And hell, even this storyline, like pretty much, Smallville had taken a lot of inspiration from Superman Birthright, where Lex and Clark were also good friends back in high school. So this isn't just a basic storyline. And another complaint that people also had too with this version of Lex is that he's not imposing because of the actor's build and his tech bro personality. But if you go back into the scenes like him talking to Fitch about devils coming from the sky, no, devils don't come from hell beneath us. No, they come from the sky. And then literally in that scene where he's talking down to Superman, Lex rides off in the helicopter and Superman arrives from below. So a little bit of symbolism right there. Or him creating Doomsday and stuff, and we really see like how he really has a lot of aura and stuff. Hell, he didn't show any fear, any sign of fear when of Superman possibly melting his face off, where he threatened Martha and stuff like that, and Superman was ready to kill Lex, but then Lex is like, if you kill me, Martha dies. If you fly away, Martha also dies. But if you bring me the head of the bat, Martha lives. And then, you know, of course, when Doomsday attacks him and stuff first, of all people, yeah, pretty much. He didn't show any signs of fear even then and stuff, you know? Even in the comics, at one point, like, Lex was kind of a chunky, fat, bald guy, or receding. His hair was actually receding backwards and stuff, where he wasn't really imposing either. So, would Jesse have been better off playing, like, the Riddler, like everybody says, the Mad Hatter, or Jimmy Olsen, like he auditioned for? Yeah, he would have. Even better than the Riddler from the Matt Reeves Batman, in my opinion. But with more time, since BVS was kind of placed between Man of Steel and what would have been a Man of Steel 2, his Lex would have been more wisened up to become one of, like, you know, the one we really know him as. So, just all that kind of build up, you know. And then the whole tech bro personality thing, I know it's an obvious facade where he's just using stories like his dead dad and stuff, like, oh, well, if I just keep everything the same, maybe dad might magically come back to life. You know, basically he's using stuff like that. Write checks for Lex. My dad was not Lex in front of the corp. you know, stuff like that. He was saying that to kind of get sympathy so he can get what he wanted. But in the eyes of Superman, Lex had no problem being himself, who he truly is, and talking crap about his dad and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Where he was like, he's like, my dad, no God didn't intervene to stop Daddy's fists and abominations. No, you know, stuff like that. I'm just saying, like, yeah, those are some things that a lot of people didn't really pick up on. If you really go back on BVS a couple of times, you might kind of catch some of that stuff. That's what makes it a little bit more of an interesting kind of movie compared to your standard just, superhero popcorn flick. But yeah, or him kind of being introduced and stuff in the beginning where he's making a 3-point shot and stuff, you know, kind of showing that he's a very chill boss and he's playing with the employees and stuff like that. And it's like, wow, I can really get along with a guy like this. You know, I can kind of see us as friends. So that's what this Lex Luthor was supposed to be, in a way. And kind of like they always say, like, evil isn't always subtle. Sometimes it's grotesque. Sometimes it's beautiful. It can be a mobster. It can be a priest. Or it could be the Ice Cream Man. But, hell, even I can be true evil. And you probably wouldn't even know it. But as far as live-action Lex Luthors go, I would say Jesse Eisenberg will probably be like my second or third favorite version of Lex Luthor. First is always going to be Michael Rosenbaum from Smallville, but I think Jesse actually was, you know, pretty decent and stuff. You know, I mean, even if you might not like his Lex Luthor and stuff, he was actually a pretty talented actor and all that, and he definitely has range. But tell me down below what you guys think.
And Jesse Eisenberg of Lex Luthor, that's great. And that was your idea.
Yeah, and Jesse, I met with Jesse for something else and then for another part in the movie, and we just talked, and then when he left, I was like, maybe Jesse's Lex Luthor, you know, like maybe Jesse is Lex because he's like a modern Lex, you know, he becomes even more diabolical in some ways because I love the one thing that Jesse does, I think that's really interesting, is like, when you meet Lex for the first time, you're like, oh, he's a little bit of a joke. He's kind of campy and not really that serious, and I'm not as sure what he's up to. But then by the end, you realize like he's like deeply philosophical and like an incredible manipulator, and like the whole, just the power that he has is it's cool. I really like what he did.